So let me just acknowledge the contribution from my former PhD students, Paolo Di Lorenzo, Stefania Sardelliti, and Gesualdo Scutari. Part of this work was included in some of former European projects, even though not all of them were exactly on bio-inspired signal processing. But we took inspiration from these biological systems to devise some innovative mechanisms to be used in wireless sensor networks. This is the case, for example, of WindSock. Anyway, so let's give some introduction on the overall structure of this talk. So essentially, I divided in two columns. On the left side, I show some examples of biological systems which can be a source of inspiration for our further studies. And on the right side, the engineering systems which could take advantage of this knowledge. So I will go through completely different aspects. Of course, I'm not a biologist, so I can be quite not very precise on the biological systems. I just try to devise mathematical models of these biological systems so that with mathematics we are able to play with it and translate the problem formulation into an engineering system which could take advantage of it. So essentially, I will go through these steps. At the beginning, I will just give some examples which are hopefully interesting from the biological side, and then the motivation on the engineering side. Then I will just say a little bit about echolocation, which is probably historically a big problem in signal processing. Then show how diffusion mechanisms in nature can be translated into the design of sensor networks. Then show how the self-synchronization mechanism which we see in nature can be used as a distributed estimation and detection system, again in wireless sensor networks. Then I will show how swarming models or what is called chemotaxis, I will explain it later on, can be used as a way to do distributed radio resource allocation in cognitive networks. And then show something about self-assembly, which could be used in nanotechnology, for example. And then I will conclude with evolutionary games. So let's start with just with a few examples, just to motivate. And so just a few motivations of what I will be talking about. First one, which is probably an historical problem, is waveform design or array design. So in this case, what is important to do is design the optimal waveforms, optimal in some criterion, could be maximum signal-to-noise ratio, maximum detection probability, and so on, to detect targets. This is a historical problem in radar, for example. And then the second one is how to locate in angle, so how to use an array of sensors to locate the presence of some emitters. So what we want to show is that we can take inspiration of how, for example, bats or dolphins work to see how engineering systems do approximately the same. In some cases. In other cases, still nature does something more complicated than what we do today. Then self-organization. Yeah, this is quite important nowadays, for example, in cognitive radios, but not only cognitive, in all those communication systems where it is particularly important to have a decentralized mechanism to allocate radio resources. This is particularly true now that we see the deployment of these heterogeneous networks, which see the presence of very different cells, starting from macro cells to femtocells and so on. So in this case, just because we are going to have cells with very small radius and a really huge number of them, the radius will be on the order of 10 meters, the smallest ones. It is necessary to incorporate in these systems some kind of self-organization. And of course, nature acts like an open book in terms of self-organizing mechanism. This is why we could take advantage of knowing them. Then the next point is wireless sensor networks. again, these are systems which are where the most critical issue is probably energy efficiency. And then it is, again, particularly important that each single sensor could be very, very simple. It should use just a small amount of energy. And nevertheless, the overall system should be capable of doing something quite complicated and sophisticated. So again, the main question is how to design a system so that even though the single components are very simple with small energy, how can it be possible to devise the interaction among the single components so that the overall system should be capable of very sophisticated behaviors? And again, self-assembly. The problem, of course, here, I'm not an expert, but I can imagine if we look into the future, is that if we look at this trend in nanotechnology, what we would like to do is that we want to build something that operates at very small scale, right, at nanoscale. Now the problem is how can we design systems so that these molecules are able to build structures, like, for example, nanotubes or sophisticated nanotubes, let's say, without the possibility of intervening over the single carbon molecules and so on. So one approach could be that if these nanosystems are able to interact with each other so that their evolution will tend to build a structure, this could be a new way of designing systems, fabricating, building systems, so that these molecules, in principle, ideally, should be able to interact with each other and build the structure that we want them to build. This would be the idea. Of course, I will not go into this, but I will show how we can design the interaction among single components so that these single agents can move in order to build any shape that we want to build. And I will show some example. Okay, now this is just one slide, let's say more on the philosophical side, but it's only one. And the point is this. Nowadays, this word self-organization appears everywhere. It's like an advertising of some system which could be useful when you write a research proposal and so on. So this is why I said it's often an overabused word. Now, if you want to go more deeply into this, there is a nice book. The title of the book can look strange, but the title is Autopoiesis and Cognition. What does autopoiesis means? From the Greek language, poiesis means creation, similar to creation, auto, self. So it's like, what is so the goal of this book is try to give, to provide conditions under which we can define a living system. So what it is that characterize a biological, a living system. So what they say is the following. They start giving a definition of a machine. So the organization of a machine is completely specified by the relation among its components. So I underline here the word relation because this is the important point. And then they define what they call the autopoietic machine. What is an autopoietic machine? It's a machine whose product is the continuous generation and specification of its own organization. So it's like it's a machine, and the product of the machine is the rule that defines the organization of the machine itself. Okay? It's like if we design software code, and the output of this software is the code. It's like you have some kind of feedback system. So in a way, it's a machine that generates the organization of itself. Okay, so what they prove, and this is interesting, at least philosophically, is that this autopoiesis condition is a necessary and sufficient condition to specify the organization of a living system. So they say a living system must be autopoietic. And if you are able to build an autopoietic machine, this acts like a living system. Anyways, just to point out that is interesting. It's interesting that someone provides a characterization of a living system with a theorem which has the necessary and sufficient conditions. This is something I found quite strange, right? Anyways. Okay, here I just want to point out 4 examples of living systems which are quite interesting and actually I will take some inspiration from these ideas. By the way, just because we are here, not far from Pisa, I should pay credit to Galileo Galilei, right? Because Galileo was living not far from here, in Pisa. And Galileo was saying that nature is like an open book, which is in front of us. The problem is how to be able to read the book. So for Galileo, the way to be able to read the book was to know geometry. So in a way, here we are doing something similar, because mathematics is the only language that we have devised through time that helps us to better understand the nature that is in front of us and to use it for our own purposes, so in a way. So let's give a look at these 4 examples. The first one starts from this kind of, it's a slime mold. It's a kind of, not mushroom, fungus, let's say. It's called Dictyostelium discoideum. Now, the interesting point is this. Maybe I will show it from here. Okay, this is a sort of microorganism that acts like this. There is this kind of fruiting body that emits spores. The spore is very small. It's like 5 micron big. Now, the important point is the following. If these spores, like live in the terrain, and there is enough food around them, they live as individual organisms that are getting food from the environment. Now, in case the environment does not provide enough food for them to live, what is interesting is that they combine together and they become a single organism. So they combine together. So they live like a single amoebas, like a single cell organism, but just in case the food around them is not sufficient, they aggregate with each other and they build this kind of mechanism of organism that we see here, quite sophisticated. So this is really a big example of self-organization. Not only they are single living systems that decide to live together as a single organism, just because in that way they are more able to get food, let's say, or water from the environment. Now, the second example, the second class of examples is what we can define as self-synchronization mechanisms. Well, nature is full of examples of self-synchronization. Probably the first scientist who was able to detect this self-synchronization mechanism was Huygens, Christian Huygens. He was, in a certain time of his life, sick in the bed. He had nothing to do, essentially. He should lie on the bedroom. So he was observing two pendulum clock in his room. And what he noticed that even though these 2 pendulums were hanging from the ceiling, and then he noticed that these pendulums were swinging together, even if we will touch some of them so that to put them out of synchronization. So this was quite strange, like a miracle, right? How should they synchronize? So he was the first one to report this strange mechanism. Okay, and then this mechanism is present in a variety of examples, like fireflies, the small insects who flash together. Not all of them flash together. In Italy, I've never seen them flashing together. But yes, but there is a reason. Essentially, where they have seen them flashing together is in Southeast Asia, actually in the jungle. And the reason is that in the jungle, the vegetation is so important, so widespread, that would be difficult for these fireflies to meet with each other, so for mating purposes. So this is why they developed this kind of behavior so that I don't remember if the males or the females, one of them, they flash together. So for example,